pleasure to welcome back to the show Rob Lees from Mortgage Choice Blue Mountains in Penrith. And we've been chatting about social media, Rob, all morning.
Right.
But you're going to change the tune a little bit.
Change the tune. We're going to talk about economics.
Yeah.
That's far more stimulating, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh, the smiles on the faces of the people here. If only you could see it.
So
they're excited.
Because, here's the interesting thing, because that's what we were chatting about, is how do you make kind of subjects like ours finance engaging. So
Yes, yep.
The pressure's on here. So we're going to be talking about the Reserve Bank of Australia and how they kept the cash rate on hold again.
Yes, again.
At the 1.5%. And you're going to jazz this up and make us all really excited about the RBA and the cash rate.
Yes, some people here are pretending that they're snoring, but but you know, it's stimulating stuff. I'm on the edge of my seat every on the first Tuesday of every month, waiting for that announcement to come out. You know, it's just.
I think you're lying.
No, I'm on the edge of my seat.
Are you
sure
really?
Absolutely.
I find it's quite predictable at the moment.
Well, it is. Okay, you got me there. It's been about I think it's been about 18 months now where it's been kept on hold. And really, there's no reason for the RBA to make any move on the cash rate yet. The economy's still pretty much in neutral.
Yeah.
And so it's not going anywhere. And I suppose to understand how it works, the cash rate monetary policy, it's a lever. And so it's a lever that's used to either slow down the market if the market's getting away from itself and we're growing too fast. But if we need some stimulation, they can cut the rate and actually puts more cash back into the economy and hopefully stimulates the economy. But right now, the cash rate's probably low enough. Although there was one commentator, one out of about 60, I think, who predicted that there would be a rate cut. Now, there was one there. I've got his name somewhere, but I've lost it in my notes here. But there was one sole academic, I think he was from Monash University. So, look, that's kind of how it is at the moment. Nothing's changed. We don't have enough jobs growth. We don't have enough inflation yet. It's still pretty stable. So things are just as they are.
Is this the exciting segment?
Okay, well,
I'm enjoying it anyway, Rob.
The thing that people want to know is, bottom line is this going to cost me more? Yeah. And the good news, and that's why people are on the edge of their seats, is, hey, things aren't going to change. It's not going to cost you any more yet.
Or when are things going to change?
Well,
I mean,
it's
that's
probably
a great
this
question,
is the big warning bell, I suppose. How long is this going to go on? It's probably going to go on till toward the beginning of next year before there'll be the first rate increase. Although the bad news is it may be that the banks do their own little increases along the way because the cost of funding, because it's overseas funding and overseas markets are getting some growth. So that might mean there's out of cycle increases from the banks that we might expect in the months ahead.
Do put their rates up out of RBA rate cycles these days has an impact on the lever that the RBA have got to use, because potentially they're almost controlling a little bit more themselves with their own decisions?
Yeah, I don't know, but surely it would. I mean, I can't say emphatically, but it has to have an impact. So, look, the rate increases are coming, but 1.25% increase is going to have a big effect. So I think when we go through this next cycle, it won't be as much as other cycles. So a couple of rate increases, a couple of 0.25 increases, they're going to have a very big effect. So I don't think this cycle will be as high as other cycles.
So what are the practical things that you would observe in the market?
Practical in terms of,
well, like the layperson, like people who have got like investment properties,
Yep.
Employment. You know, will they potentially lose their jobs? Like, what's your take on it?
Well, it's at the moment, I think things are pretty much, it's just sort of rolling along. It's sort of business as usual, really. In terms of businesses borrowing to invest, there probably is going to be rate increases. It certainly is. Any sort of borrowing is becoming more difficult, and that's coming out of the Royal Commission. So it's going to be a lot more difficult to get a loan. Although on the other side, the Australian Prudential Regulation Authority, the banking regulator, announced that they were going to release their investor growth restrictions. So it's probably in the investor loan space, that probably means that the investment loans are going to be reduced and might make it a little more affordable.
How do you think all of that, what you've just spoken about, interest rates and the market and the rates moving up and down, how do you think all that affects the actual housing affordability crisis that we have in Sydney?
Yeah, well, I think that's the other thing that I wanted to talk about, what's happening in housing. I know, Karen, you've been chatting about this, of course, more particularly in our localised market. But the market nationally is coming off. Certainly the Sydney market is softer. It's lost ground statistically. From RP data, it varies from region to region. It seems like the regionals, there's growth in the regionals, but the Sydney market has lost ground. Now, we were talking off air before, where does Blue Mountains sit here?
Yeah.
Are we Sydney
regional
or are we regional? And we're a bit of both,
yeah,
depending on which flavour appeals to us most. We are tied to the Sydney market, but we're not the Sydney market.
We're not, and I think
we're an outer region.
When we were driving home from the airport yesterday, and I don't know how far, because obviously I pulled in at Valley Heights, but from literally Valley Heights all the way past Parramatta, the traffic coming down the mountain, and we were having a bit of a chat, and we think this was the analogy that we came up with, was because I think the Blue Mountains has, as the city, the urban growth spreads, the Blue Mountains is becoming closer to the city, so it's kind of like it's a beautiful day, let's head up to the mountains, where we did at one point seem so far away that it was more like an overnight destination, whereas now it's a bit of a day tripper. So I think, do you think all that has impact on the prices in the market here in the Blue Mountains?
Well, it's
as we
certainly
become closer?
the mountains is closer. It's in greater proximity to the city, and more so the lower mountains. Upper mountains a little further. But it's certainly becoming, it's starting to turn, I think, more to more of a buyer's market, whereas Sydney's been certainly a vendor's market. Some of the stats too are that the units are becoming more affordable. So, all that's, I think, good news for home buyers. As far as investment is concerned, other capitals are probably worth looking at. We've missed the boat probably on Tassie. Tassie's had 12% growth. So we should have bought in Tassie about 12 months ago. But there's other areas. My view on the Sydney market for investment is, if you're looking for short-term capital gains, it isn't going to happen. And so it probably means looking at other markets, and that may be Brisbane, for example, which is still yet to have its own boom. And it hasn't really had a boom for some time yet.
No, I'm still waiting.
So, there's a little, there's not much. Brisbane has had 0.9% growth in the last 12 months. So it still isn't going anywhere much, but at least it's not losing ground. So I think that as the market comes off, there's going to be more buying opportunities available, which is good news.
What about, traditionally, I think a lot of Sydney siders think of Brisbane and Melbourne.
Yep.
But then obviously Melbourne's become a lot closer to the Sydney market in dollar value. Brisbane's still a little bit cheaper. But what about outside of that? What about South Australia or,
Yeah, well, South Australia, the stuff that I've read, that it's not coming up on the radar in terms of Adelaide. Adelaide has had a little bit of growth, not much, but I think the reason is that Adelaide doesn't have as much infrastructure planned, whereas the thing with Brisbane is a lot more infrastructure, a lot more jobs growth going on there, and that's why a lot of the research is pointing to Brisbane as if you're wanting a short-term capital gain, whereas the Sydney market, we've had the boom, and you're probably going to have to wait. Well, we don't know when the next boom is, 5, 10 years, whatever it might be, until it takes off again. As an investor, that is.
Yeah, interesting, isn't it? And then you never know. There's no
that's right.
No guarantees ever.
That's right.
All right, Rob. So, and you mentioned before about the fact that APRA, the Australian's Prudential Regulation Authority, starting to loosen up on the investors. So,
and that suggests too that they actually want to stimulate the economy. So maybe part of their thinking too is maybe we've held things back too much.
Yeah.
So
let's hope that's what they're thinking, and they start to
because the worry with this tightened lending policy is that it can have a bigger overall effect on the economy if housing prices go down,
Yeah.
building approvals, and suddenly we'll start to
It's
go
really
backwards
hard
as
to get
far
the
as
balance right, isn't it?
and
Because-
that's what they're always playing with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. It'd be interesting to see what the budget that comes out tomorrow.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that next time in a fortnight.
Yeah, because my prediction would be the reason they've got a surplus is all the stamp duty they've taken from all of us in
That's right.
anyone in New
they've
South
made
Wales.
it. Yeah, done well on that.
Haven't they? That's fantastic. Thank you, Rob. Thanks for joining us once again. If anyone did want any further information from Rob in regards to any of that, best place to contact you is down the hill.
The Blaxland office, 4739 9749.